Unit 731, A Dark Chapter in Human History. Unit 731 was a secret division of the Imperial Japanese Army, notorious for its inhumane experiments on living humans during World War II. Established in 1936 in Harbin, China, under the guise of a disease prevention unit, Unit 731 was in reality a true hell on Earth. Tens of thousands of prisoners of war and Chinese civilians, including pregnant women and children, were turned into live test subjects. One of the most horrifying experiments involved dissecting victims while they were fully conscious, without anesthesia, to study their organs and the progression of diseases. The unit deliberately infected them with deadly pathogens like plague, cholera, smallpox, and anthrax to research the spread and effects of these diseases. They also conducted freezing experiments on human bodies to study frostbite treatments and tested biological and chemical weapons to assess their lethality. The cruelty didn't end there. Prisoners had their limbs amputated to study blood loss, and the limbs were sometimes reattached to the opposite sides of their bodies. Some victims underwent surgeries where their stomachs were removed and their esophagus was connected directly to their intestines. These atrocities were not only conducted for research, but also to practice and satisfy the twisted desires of the perpetrators. These barbaric acts led to agonizing deaths for countless individuals and left horrific physical and psychological scars on the few survivors. The existence of Unit 731 remains an indelible stain on human history, a haunting reminder of the brutality of war and the horrific crimes humanity can inflict upon itself. MK-Ultra Project, the CIA's dark and disturbing mind control experiment. The MK-Ultra Project was a secret research program conducted by the CIA from the 1950s to the early 1970s. The goal was to develop methods of mind control and behavioral manipulation, aiming to turn Americans into super spies, capable of carrying out assassinations without breaking under enemy interrogation. Under MK-Ultra, researchers conducted experiments on unsuspecting American and Canadian citizens, administering powerful hallucinogens along with other illegal methods such as hypnosis and possibly chemical, biological, and radiological agents. The most disturbing aspect was that many of the test subjects had no idea they were part of these experiments, including prisoners and psychiatric patients who were experimented on without consent or proper warning. The consequences of MK-Ultra were devastating. Beyond causing severe mental disorders and long-term psychological damage, some subjects died during the experiments, while many others were left with lifelong psychological scars. When MK-Ultra was exposed in the 1970s, it was heavily criticized for its gross violations of human rights and ethics. The CIA officially terminated the program in 1973. MK-Ultra remains one of the darkest chapters in American intelligence history, a haunting reminder of the extremes that were pursued in the name of national security. Project Aversion, the dark chapter of South Africa's apartheid era. During the apartheid era in South Africa, a horrific medical program was implemented to cure homosexuality within the military from 1971 to 1989. Under this program, gay individuals were subjected to brutal treatments, including forced medication and electroshock therapy, while being shown sexually stimulating images of the same sex. When these methods failed, hormone therapy, sometimes involving chemotherapy, was used as a last resort. In the most extreme cases, around 900 individuals were forced to undergo gender reassignment surgery when other gender reconditioning techniques proved unsuccessful. Most of these surgeries were performed without the victim's consent, and some procedures were left incomplete. These inhumane treatments were rooted in the misguided belief that homosexuality was a mental illness. The consequences of Project Aversion were devastating. Many victims suffered immense physical and psychological pain, with some even losing their lives during surgery. Others, left without adequate psychological or medical support, tragically took their own lives. The project left a lasting scar on South Africa's LGBT+ community, marking a severe violation of human rights. In 1995, the South African Medical Association issued a public apology for their involvement in these atrocities. However, the damage done by Project Aversion remains a painful reminder of the dangers of prejudice disguised as science. Poison Laboratory, the Soviet Union's sinister secret. The Poison Laboratory of the Soviet Secret Services, also known as Laboratory 1, Laboratory 12, or simply the Chamber, was a covert facility dedicated to the research and development of lethal toxins. Under the direction of Dr. Grigory Marinovsky and his colleagues, this lab conducted horrifying experiments on prisoners taken from the Gulag labor camps. The substances tested included mustard gas, ricin, digitoxin, and numerous other deadly poisons. The goal of these experiments was to discover a chemical compound that was tasteless, odorless, and undetectable during an autopsy, essentially the perfect poison. Victims were administered these toxins disguised as medication, food, or drink. Eventually, a compound with the desired properties, known as C2 or K2, was developed. According to witness testimonies, those exposed to these toxins experienced rapid physical deterioration, such as sudden weakness, followed by a strange calmness, and finally death within 15 minutes. Myronovsky even brought in test subjects of various ages and physical conditions to better understand the effects of each poison. Beyond experimenting on living subjects, Marinovsky also personally carried out executions using these poisons under the supervision of Pavel Sudoplatov, a high-ranking Soviet official. The Poison Laboratory remains one of the darkest secrets of the Soviet Union, a chilling reminder of the lengths to which the regime would go in its pursuit of power and control, all while hiding its brutal methods from the world. Nazi Medical, a dark chapter in human history. During World War II, the Nazi regime conducted unimaginable medical experiments on prisoners in concentration camps, all under the guise of scientific research and military advancement. These so-called experiments resulted in severe abuse, torture, and horrific suffering for those unfortunate enough to become test subjects. Victims were subjected to experiments designed to serve military purposes, such as hypothermia research. Prisoners were immersed in ice-cold water to study how long pilots could survive after crashing into the sea. Some were forced to drink only seawater, leading to agonizing deaths from dehydration. Others were placed in low-pressure chambers to simulate high-altitude conditions, with some even undergoing live brain surgeries to study the effects of changing pressure on pilots. Treating battlefield injuries was also a focus, and concentration camps became gruesome laboratories for testing new drugs. Victims were deliberately wounded, and the injuries were infected to test treatments like sulfanilamide, a new antibiotic at the time. The Nazis also conducted brutal experiments on infectious diseases and poisoning, injecting prisoners with tuberculosis bacteria to study immune responses and testing various toxins to determine how quickly they could kill. Beyond these horrifying acts, the Nazis carried out genetic and racial experiments, including forced sterilizations, artificial insemination, and ghastly studies on twins and people of short stature. These experiments symbolize the utmost cruelty and inhumanity in the field of medicine, sparking global outrage and leading to the establishment of strict ethical guidelines in medical research to protect the rights and safety of participants. The Nazi medical experiments remain a chilling reminder of the depths of human depravity, forever etched in history as a stark warning of what can happen when science is twisted to serve the darkest of ideologies. The Tuskegee Experiment, a dark stain on American medical ethics. The Tuskegee Experiment took place from 1932 to 1972, conducted by the U.S. Public Health Service and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. For 40 years, 600 poor African American farmers in Macon County, Alabama, were deceived and exploited. Among them, 399 men had latent syphilis, but they were never informed of their condition. Under the guise of providing free medical care, researchers failed to treat these men with penicillin, which had become the standard treatment for syphilis in 1947. Instead, they were given placebos and ineffective treatments, all to observe the progression of the disease. The consequences of this cruel experiment were devastating. 28 men died directly from syphilis, 100 more died from related complications, 40 wives were infected, and 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. This gross violation of ethical standards led to a deep mistrust of the medical community among African Americans. When the study was exposed in 1972, it sparked significant changes in U.S. medical research regulations, including the requirement for informed consent and stricter ethical oversight. In 1997, President Bill Clinton formally apologized to the American people, particularly the African American community, for the wrongful and racist actions taken in this study. The Tuskegee Experiment remains a painful reminder of the cruelty and unethical practices in medicine, serving as a crucial lesson in the importance of responsibility and transparency in scientific research. The Guatemala Experiment, a dark secret that shocked the world. If the Tuskegee Experiment was horrifying for observing the natural progression of disease without treatment, the Guatemala Experiment took cruelty a step further by deliberately infecting healthy individuals. Between 1946 and 1948 in Guatemala, researchers intentionally infected around 1,300 people, including prisoners, psychiatric patients, and soldiers, with syphilis, gonorrhea, and chancroid, all without their knowledge or consent. They even injected the bacteria directly into the victims' eyes and brains, turning them into living test subjects. The truth about the Guatemala experiment wasn't widely known until it was revealed in 2010, more than 60 years after the fact. The revelation sparked outrage and condemnation from the international community. In response, the U.S. government issued a formal apology to Guatemala and the victims of this horrific study. The brutality of the Guatemala experiment is not only a dark stain on medical history, but also a painful reminder of the inhumane actions that can occur when ethics are disregarded. The Stanford Prison Experiment, a harrowing dive into human nature. The Stanford Prison Experiment, conducted in 1971 by psychologist Philip Zimbardo, remains one of the most controversial studies in the history of psychology. Designed to explore the impact of a prison environment on human behavior, the experiment quickly spiraled into a nightmare that shocked the world. Participants were recruited through a newspaper ad, promising $15 a day to college students willing to take part in a psychological study about prison life. After psychological evaluations, the volunteers were randomly assigned roles as either prisoners or guards. The experiment kicked off with the prisoners being arrested by actual police officers, a detail that set the stage for what was to come. As the days progressed, the guards began to abuse their power, growing increasingly cruel and dehumanizing. They forced prisoners to perform humiliating tasks like scrubbing toilets with their bare hands or waking up in the middle of the night to do pointless exercises. The guards devised even more sinister punishments to break the prisoners' spirits. What started as an experiment quickly turned into a harrowing display of psychological torture. The psychological toll on the prisoners was immediate and severe. One broke down into uncontrollable sobs and trembling after just a few days, while others showed signs of extreme stress, mental exhaustion, and hopelessness. The prisoners' will to resist crumbled, and they became fully submissive, accepting any punishment without protest. The cruelty escalated to such a disturbing level that another psychologist, Christina Maslach, confronted Zimbardo and insisted he end the experiment. What was supposed to last 2 weeks was abruptly halted after only 6 days. The Stanford prison experiment has since been widely criticized for its ethical shortcomings and flawed methodology. It serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the critical importance of ethics in scientific research. North Korean chilling allegations of a dark reality. There have been numerous reports of human experimentation in North Korea, painting a chilling picture that echoes the horrors of Nazi and Japanese experiments during World War II. The North Korean government, of course, denies these allegations, claiming that all prisoners are treated humanely. But the stories that have surfaced tell a different tale. One former North Korean female prisoner recounted a horrifying experience where 50 healthy female prisoners were selected and fed cabbage leaves laced with poison. Despite their pleas for help when they realized the food was tainted, refusal to eat would have meant retaliation against them and their families. Within minutes, the women began vomiting blood and suffering from rectal bleeding. Tragically, all 50 died within 20 minutes. A former security chief at Camp 22 described laboratories specifically equipped for poison gas, asphyxiation, and blood experiments. In these gruesome tests, 3 or 4 people, often entire families, were subjected to deadly gases. After medical examinations, the rooms were sealed and toxic gases were pumped in while scientists observed from above through glass windows. The former officer recalled watching a family of 4, parents and 2 children, succumb to the gas as the parents desperately tried to save their kids with mouth-to-mouth resuscitation until they too collapsed and died. These stories are horrifying glimpses into the alleged atrocities within North Korean prison camps, acts that defy basic human decency and human rights. While North Korea remains shrouded in secrecy, the accounts of these harrowing experiments continue to surface, offering a disturbing look into the potential dark realities hidden within the regime.